Welcome back to my channel. You can't tell from watching my videos, but in conversations, I'm more of a listener rather than a talker. I learn a lot by just listening. Even if I think the person is wrong, their ideas may stimulate some new insight in me. Besides, I'm also essentially a brainstormer. Normally, this is when multiple people are throwing out ideas, no matter how foolish they sound, because even a bad idea can stimulate someone to come up with a good one. But I often just do this with myself. As a result, a lot of my friends would probably describe me as the guy who keeps coming up with crazy ideas that go against common belief or even against what experts say. Frankly, I've been laughed at many times by friends or even experts, only to later have them decide I was right after all. This also means I'm willing to challenge the claims of anyone, expert or not, if I see a flaw in their reasoning. Often I don't know the answers, but I see the flaws, so I'll just file it away for years or even decades because it isn't that important to me at the time. But I may later stumble upon more information that will clarify things, or something will happen that increases its importance to me, so I dig deeper into the subject. An example of the latter was a subject I've covered before. So let me do a very quick reminder so you understand what I'm talking about before moving on with my main topic. It was a claim that words are only 7% of communication. I've heard that many times for over 50 years as if it was just a fact, but it never made sense to me. However, it was never important enough for me to bother researching it. That is, until a troll decided to use it to change what someone said with a claim that body language revealed what they really meant. I took apart that claim using basic logic, but I also researched how the study was done and saw it was very flawed for determining any such thing. And finally, I found an interview with the author of the studies it is based on, and even he said the studies weren't about general communication, and to think words were only 7% of that was absurd. So, it took me many decades to deal with something I always thought was wrong. And even though most sources I found believe it is true, including educational institutions, I was able to establish it was wrong. Facts are facts, not popularity contests. Which brings me to the subject of this video. Over and over again, I hear the claim that 80% of women only go after 20% of men. I don't recall anyone disagreeing with that, but it never made sense to me. After all, way more than 20% of men get married, and many men who never get married still date. Such numbers don't seem to support the 80-20 claim. It can get pretty complicated and hard to get meaningful statistics. For example, one source I found said that 50% of men in the US were married, but they counted adults as anyone 15 years old and above. That's nuts. Sure, some young kids do get married, but they sure aren't adults, and such exceptions aren't appropriate to include in any study about normal marriage patterns. When you include a group where most aren't even supposed to be married, it just skews the percentages to be lower than common sense dictates. Another key item is that 37% of men had never been married. So it seems the 50% married only counted those who were married at the time of the survey. Apparently another 13% had been married before, but either are widowers or got divorced. That makes 62% of men who did get married at some point. Even that is misleadingly low, but it's enough to show the problem with some data you may find. Regardless, the facts don't support the 80-20 rule in my opinion. So all this stayed in the back of my mind, awaiting an explanation, and I think I found it by, again, just listening. It came from a simple interview the Filipina P made with a woman in Florida, and it went like this.
Do you believe that 80% of women only like 20% of men?
Yes,
Why?
because I'll say that the women are more picky since they choose who they want to go on dates. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
As you can see, the woman accepts the claim, and that's fine. And you can see from how she is moving her hands that she is mimicking swiping on a dating app. That fit a key item I always suspected, that it isn't about men and women dating overall, but rather just describes what women do on dating apps. The next part was also important and seemed to confirm it.
What should the rest of the guys do? What do you think? If only
Go talk in person.
This was a little difficult to understand, partly because she sounds like a foreigner speaking English. Did she say no talking in person? That would seem to make no sense as an alternative to dating apps, since it is on a dating app that you don't get the benefit of talking directly. I think it is far more likely she said go talking in person with flawed English structure. In other words, it should have been go talk in person. This makes perfect sense. But even if she said no, I would bet that isn't the word she meant to use. Anyway, the point would be, in my opinion, that if you don't fit the top 20% in dating apps, talk to women in person so other factors matter. I could be mistaken, but that interpretation would make a lot more sense. After all, when you're looking at pictures on a dating app, a lot of men will be skipped just because they aren't handsome. You don't get the personality, and you can't really trust what they say in a profile. But if you meet a person, someone you may pass over in a dating app may reveal other things to attract you. I have certainly found that to be the case with a lot of women I ended up liking when I was young. I think this shows it is likely the 80-20 rule only applies to dating apps at best. But I dug a little further, checking a Pew poll on who uses dating apps. If that's the context, then it's worth noting that only 30% of Americans have ever used one. Plus, those who do use a dating app may also find dates with people they meet in traditional ways. So if I'm right, the 80-20 rule could only be based on the adults when they are using a dating app. The rule may not reflect the overall dating situation very well at all. What if you take the top 20% of men on dating apps and make them also be known from work, church, mutual friends, etc.? Would the top 20% be the same? I doubt it. We'd know more about their real personalities and other things you can't tell from a picture, which may not be accurate anyway. Some of these men would already be known as being dishonest or untrustworthy people, and the women would have a better idea of their economic standing. Some would be known as jerks, regardless of whether they are good looking or not. Meanwhile, some ordinary guys would be known as highly intelligent, personable, dependable, etc., which could move them into the top 20%. So while I don't know what all the possible data may prove about the 80-20 rule, I feel quite confident to say it isn't particularly accurate when you are applying it to every person in the dating pool. And then I dug deeper. I found out that a couple early surveys supporting the rule were from dating sites, as I suspected. Some sources do clearly say it is only based on those in dating apps, but many treat the 80-20 rule with no such restrictions. Unless they have something else to support their claim, they're making an unsupported extension of the rule. I also figure most of those who present the rule too broadly aren't really trying to mislead people. Some of them probably heard the claim and just assumed it covered dating in general. Others may know better, but don't realize the way they presented it didn't make that clear. So I'm just advising people to be careful about what you believe. I also found a video from a woman who pointed out some other noteworthy details about these surveys. She mentions the first one from OkCupid as being too old, and then moves on to a newer one.
So that's when I found my way to this study, Rules of Attraction, Females' Perception of Male Self-Representation in a Dating App. So I read this study. But there are two things I want to point out about this study before we get into the actual results. First, one variable, however, was controlled since the experiment was conducted in Korea, which is still quite a homogenous society. We have excluded profiles of the men who looked obviously foreign. So in this study of how women react to certain dating profiles, male dating profiles, it was Korean women reacting to what can be assumed is Korean males' profiles. So if you are a man in the United States, I can guarantee you your profile was not shown in this study, not even one like yours. The next is the sample size. If you were thinking that a study of 27 people maybe isn't the most complete study, you would be thinking how I'm thinking. However, this study only had 27 participants. As you can see down here at the bottom sentence, 27 participants were supposed to evaluate 100 profiles, each resulting in 2,700 cases, meaning that yes, 2,700 cases is a lot, but that's only the opinions of 27 participants that saw 100 profiles.
This struck me as having many of the same problems as the studies about the value of words in a conversation. That one also surveyed very few people, and all of them were female undergraduate students taking their first psychology course. You can't make broad claims based on such a small, homogeneous group. She goes on to evaluate the basics of what the study was about.
Now, what this study was actually trying to answer was, which criteria females use to evaluate male profiles? What are their reasons for accepting/rejecting a male profile? How can men optimize their Tinder profile to get more matches? This was not a study of what women find attractive. This was a study of how can men better their profiles to increase their chances.
This also fits in with a similar flaw in what people said about the value of words, because the author of the studies that claim was based on said people were wrong about what it was even about. That is, it was not about general communication.
Because if you look at the results, our research shows that while deciding whether to accept or reject a potential match on Tinder, women are highly selective. It also suggests that factors underlying their choice are attractiveness and the perceived nice personality of a man in the picture. The research results also show that while positive results are harder to predict since attractiveness is highly subjective, reasons for match rejection are quite universal. The reasons that will most likely make the male profile rejected can both be objective, a big age difference. That was a huge one they cited, was that women liked much more close proximity in age, and those that can be easily changed, such as a face not clearly shown on the picture or weird/unfriendly facial expressions. The answer, the conclusion, the discussion and implications of this basically said, hey men, women are rejecting you either because you're out of their age range, whether you're too young or too old, which is something that can't be changed, or there is something inherently unfriendly or off-putting about your profile, which also can be changed. That bottom sentence, it says, the reasons most likely to make a male profile rejected is those that can be easily changed. A face not clearly shown on the picture or weird, unfriendly facial expressions. It does not say, you're so ugly, you have no chance, sorry.
It should be obvious you should filter out big age differences that women pass over. Sure, they happen, but they are also a small exception in the West. But I was more interested in the effect of pictures. It isn't necessarily about being good looking, but just choosing poor pictures. I saw another woman's video which made a similar point. She talked about how women are taught from a young age how to present themselves to best effect, but men usually are not. She gave an example of a picture a guy may put up that shows him with a group of men, maybe playing some sport, which means it isn't really going to give someone a good idea of what you look like, so you get passed over because it is too hard to make an evaluation, or just an unattractive picture for any number of reasons, including making you look unfriendly. Face it, people are likely going to guess at your personality from your picture. Back to the other woman's video, she then goes into a Pew Research paper, which brings up other reasons someone may be passed over regardless of how high they rank.
Here we have the intention of people getting on dating apps. To meet a long-term partner or spouse, women exceed men. To date casually, men exceed women. To have casual, men exceed women. So if women are swiping left on profiles, it possibly could be that a man sets his intentions for a fling or for a hookup and they're not interested, hence them swiping.
This just shows the weakness of many surveys or studies. There are so many possible factors, but they can be oversimplified and leave important factors out. Now, you may be thinking that I didn't conclusively show what the information we have actually means. Well, that's right. But an important thing to know is when you don't have the needed data to claim you know something. Therefore, I'm not making extravagant claims. Rather, I'm pointing out that claims of others are often misleading. And there are many more things I found on this issue that would make it even more confusing. But knowing that you don't know many things is actually an accomplishment. But I do think I've shown enough to demonstrate that the 80-20 rule is, at best, very limited and does not represent dating overall. One more thing about what the woman P interviewed said. My critics may be tempted to object to me assuming what she was really trying to say, since I complain when trolls do it to others. But consider the differences. I explained why I thought her actual words were misspoken. I also pointed out that I could be mistaken anyway. And most important, I wasn't making any negative comments about her. This is pretty much the opposite of what the trolls do. Thanks for watching, and don't let the trolls stop you from speaking out.